The gunshot echoed across the Montana prairie, startling a flock of birds into flight as Mabel Thompson instinctively ducked behind the weathered oak counter of her general store, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't the first time gunfire had disturbed the relative peace of Silver Creek, but the sound still made her blood run cold, especially since her husband's death 3 years prior. It was 1885, and the West was gradually becoming more civilized, but Silver Creek remained a town where men still settled differences with six-shooters rather than words. Mabel had learned to keep her Winchester rifle within reach at all times, especially when managing the store alone. The commotion outside grew louder, men shouting, horses whinnying, the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. Cautiously rising from behind the counter, Mabel reached for her rifle, her fingers curling around the smooth wooden stock. At 32, she was no stranger to trouble, having survived not only her husband's death, but also the harsh realities of being a woman alone in frontier territory. The door to her store burst open, the little bell above it jingling incongruously with the violence of the entrance. A man stumbled in, clutching his side, crimson seeping between his fingers and staining his dusty coat. "Help," he managed, before collapsing onto the rough-hewn floorboards. Mabel moved quickly, locking the door behind him and pulling down the window shades. Whoever was after this stranger would have to get through her first. She knelt beside him, gently rolling him onto his back to assess the damage. He was handsome despite the grime and blood, strong-jawed with a face weathered by sun and wind, deep lines around his eyes suggesting he smiled often. Those eyes, currently half closed in pain, were a startling blue against his tanned skin. His dark hair, streaked with silver at the temples, curled slightly beneath his hat, which had fallen off during his collapse. "You've been shot," she stated unnecessarily, her practiced hands already working to remove his coat. "Noticed that," he grunted, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace. "Name's Wade Donovan." "Mabel Thompson," she replied automatically, focusing on examining his wound. "What kind of trouble are you in, Mr. Donovan?" "The kind that follows a man," he said cryptically, wincing as she probed the area around the bullet hole. "They think I have something that belongs to them." "And do you?" Mabel asked, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Wade's eyes met hers, clear and direct despite his pain. "No, madam. Not anymore." Something in his gaze made Mabel believe him, though she'd learned long ago that honest faces could hide dishonest hearts. Still, she couldn't turn away a wounded man, regardless of what might be chasing him. "The bullet passed through," she informed him, relief evident in her voice. "You're lucky. It missed anything vital, but you've lost blood and need tending." Outside, voices called Wade's name, angry and threatening. Mabel made a split-second decision. "Can you stand?" she whispered urgently. With her help, Wade managed to get to his feet, leaning heavily on her as she guided him through the back room of the store and into the small house attached to it. She settled him on her bed, then hurried back to the store, grabbing her medical supplies and quickly mopping up the blood on the floor. Just as she finished, pounding came at the front door. Composing herself, Mabel unlocked it and faced 3 rough-looking men, their expressions murderous. "Afternoon, gentlemen," she said calmly, the rifle visible but not aimed. "Something I can help you with?" "We're looking for a man," the largest one said, attempting to peer past her into the store. "Tall fellow, dark hair. He's wounded." "Haven't seen anyone fitting that description," Mabel replied. "Just been minding the store all day." The men exchanged glances, clearly skeptical. "Mind if we take a look around?" "I do mind," Mabel said firmly. "Unless you have a warrant or plan to make a purchase, I'll thank you to be on your way. I'm closing early today." The implied threat of her rifle and the steel in her voice made the men hesitate. Finally, the leader nodded grudgingly. "We'll be keeping an eye out, Mrs. Thompson. That man is dangerous." "I appreciate the warning," she said, her expression neutral. "Good day, gentlemen." After they left, Mabel locked up properly, drawing all the curtains and securing the back door before returning to her unexpected patient. Wade was pale but conscious, watching her with those penetrating blue eyes. "You didn't have to lie for me," he said softly. "I didn't like the look of them," she replied, setting down her medical supplies. "Now, let's get you properly patched up." As she cleaned and bandaged his wound, Wade studied her face. There was something familiar about her delicate features, the way her honey-brown hair escaped from its pins to curl against her neck, the determined set of her mouth as she worked. But it couldn't be, could it? Have we met before, Mrs. Thompson? He asked, his voice carefully casual. Mabel paused, finally looking at him properly. I don't believe so, Mr. Donovan. I'd remember. Wade nodded, wincing as she tied off the bandage. Must be mistaken. Thank you for your help. You should rest, she told him, gathering her supplies. I'll bring you some food later. For 3 days, Mabel tended to Wade, bringing him soup and bread, changing his bandages, and gradually learning pieces of his story. He claimed to be a rancher from Wyoming, passing through on business when he'd run afoul of some local troublemakers. It sounded plausible enough, though Mabel sensed he was holding something back. On the 4th day, when Wade was strong enough to sit at her kitchen table, Mabel served him beef stew and freshly baked cornbread, watching as he ate with obvious appreciation. Best meal I've had in years, he told her, smiling. You're a fine cook, Mrs. Thompson. Mabel, she corrected him. After pulling a bullet out of a man, I think we can dispense with formalities. Wade's smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. Mabel then, and I'm Wade, not Mr. Donovan. She nodded, studying him as she sipped her coffee. In the warm glow of the oil lamp, his features seemed softer, his eyes kinder. Despite her better judgment, Mabel found herself drawn to this mysterious stranger. Those men haven't come back, she noted. Do you think they've moved on? Wade's expression darkened. I doubt it. Men like that are persistent. I should leave soon, before I bring more trouble to your door. You're not fully healed, Mabel protested. Another few days won't hurt. Why are you helping me? Wade asked suddenly. You don't know me. I could be exactly what they said dangerous. Mabel considered the question seriously. My husband always said I was too trusting. But there's something about you. I don't believe you're a bad man, Wade Donovan. Wade looked away, his expression unreadable. Your husband. He's not. Thomas died 3 years ago. Pneumonia, Mabel explained, her voice steady despite the familiar ache in her chest. We've been married 8 years. I'm sorry, Wade said, and there was genuine sympathy in his voice. It must be hard, running this place alone. I manage, she said simply. The store provides enough, and I've learned to be self-sufficient. Wade nodded, respect evident in his gaze. You're quite a woman, Mabel Thompson. The compliment brought unexpected heat to her cheeks, and Mabel busied herself clearing the dishes. It had been a long time since she'd felt this kind of awareness of a man, and it unsettled her. That night, as she prepared a pallet for herself in the small sitting room, having given Wade her bed, she found herself wondering about the coincidence that had brought this particular man to her door. Something about him stirred memories that she'd long buried, distant echoes of a different time, a different life. The next morning, Mabel woke early, as was her habit. She moved quietly through her small house, not wanting to disturb Wade, and began preparing breakfast. To her surprise, she found him already up, standing at the window watching the sunrise paint the sky in vibrant oranges and pinks. You should be resting, she admonished gently. Wade turned, and the soft light illuminated his face in a way that made Mabel's breath catch. Some sights are worth getting up for, he said, his eyes not leaving hers. Flustered, Mabel turned to the stove. I'm making flapjacks. You should sit. As they ate breakfast, Wade told her more about his life growing up on a ranch in Colorado, working cattle drives across multiple territories, eventually saving enough to buy his own small spread in Wyoming. His stories were vivid and engaging, painting pictures of a life lived fully, if not always easily. And you, he asked, have you always been in Silver Creek? Mabel hesitated, memories flooding back. No, I grew up in Kansas. My father was a schoolteacher. I came west with my husband after we married. Thomas had dreams of striking it rich in the gold fields, but she smiled wryly. Like most dreams of that kind, they didn't quite pan out. We settled here instead, opened the store. Do you ever regret it? Coming west? Wade asked. Mabel considered the question. Sometimes. Life is harder here, but there's a freedom to it that I've come to appreciate. She glanced out the window at the vast landscape. The space to breathe, to be yourself without judgment. That's worth something. Wade nodded, understanding in his eyes. That it is. Over the next few days, as Wade's strength returned, they fell into a comfortable routine. Mabel would tend the store during the day while Wade rested or helped with small tasks around the house. In the evenings, they would share meals and conversation, discovering a surprising ease in each other's company. Mabel found herself looking forward to these quiet moments, the way Wade's eyes crinkled when he laughed, the gentle cadence of his voice as he told her stories, the careful way he listened when she spoke. It had been so long since anyone had truly listened to her. One evening, as they sat on her small porch watching the stars emerge, Wade suddenly asked, "Did you ever live in Dodge City? Before you were married?" The question startled Mabel. "Yes, actually. How did you know?" Wade's expression was difficult to read in the gathering darkness. "Just a guess. Something you said about Kansas reminded me of it. I lived there until I was 21, Mabel confirmed, curious about his interest. "My father taught at the school there for many years." Wade was silent for a long moment. "I passed through Dodge a few times in my younger days." Wild town back then. It certainly was, Mabel agreed, memories washing over her. "I remember being terrified of the Cowboys when I was a girl. My father forbade me from going anywhere near the saloons or cattle pens when the drives came through." "Wise man," Wade murmured. "Those Cowboys could be a rough bunch." Something in his tone made Mabel turn to study his profile. "Were you one of them? A drover?" Wade nodded slowly. "For a time. Wasn't much good at anything else back then." Mabel tried to imagine a younger Wade, perhaps more reckless, driving cattle up from Texas. The image came surprisingly easily. "Did you enjoy that life?" she asked. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Parts of it. The freedom, the open sky. Not so much the dust and the blisters and the ornery steers." He glanced at her. "But the towns at the end of the trail. Those were something to look forward to." "I'm sure the saloon girls were happy to see you coming," Mabel said lightly, immediately regretting the comment when Wade's expression closed off. "I wasn't much for saloons," he said quietly. "Had other interests." Before Mabel could inquire further, a noise from the direction of town caught their attention, shouting, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunfire. Wade was on his feet instantly, his hand going to his side where his pistol would normally be. "Get inside," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mabel complied, but grabbed her rifle from just inside the door. "What is it?" "Not sure," Wade said, peering into the darkness. "But I have a bad feeling those men have come back, and they've brought friends." The commotion grew louder, and soon they could make out several riders approaching the store, torches held aloft. Mabel's heart raced, but she stood firm beside Wade. "Mrs. Thompson," a voice called out. "We know you're harboring Wade Donovan. Send him out, or we'll burn this place to the ground." Wade's expression hardened. "I'm sorry, Mabel. This is my fault." "What do they want from you?" she demanded, fear and anger warring within her. Wade hesitated, then said, "It's a long story, but the short version is that I witnessed them murdering a family of homesteaders about 50 miles north of here. They were trying to force them off their land that happens to be rich in silver deposits. And you're the only witness," Mabel realized, her grip tightening on her rifle. "Yes, I was bringing proof to the U.S. Marshal in Helena when they caught up with me," Wade explained grimly. "I need to get to Helena, Mabel. Those men deserve justice." Outside, the riders were circling the property, their threats growing more specific and alarming. "Is there a back way out of here?" Wade asked urgently. Mabel nodded. "There's a small trail that leads to the creek, then follows it into the hills. I use it sometimes to gather herbs and berries." "Good. I need you to go that way. Get to safety," Wade instructed, reaching for her rifle. "No," Mabel said firmly, pulling the weapon back. "This is my home. I'm not leaving it to be burned by criminals." "Mabel, and I'm not leaving you," she added, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. "We'll face this together." Something flickered in Wade's eyes, admiration, perhaps, or something deeper. He nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this smart. Is there a cellar?" "Yes, under the store. The entrance is hidden behind the flour barrels." "Perfect. Here's what we'll do." Within minutes, they had a plan. Mabel would pretend to give Wade up, leading the men into the store where Wade would be waiting, having circled around from the back. The cellar would provide them protection and a potential escape route if needed. When Mabel stepped onto her porch, rifle raised, The men immediately trained their weapons on her. "Mrs. Thompson, where's Donovan?" the leader demanded. "He left yesterday," Mabel called back, her voice steady despite her fear. "Headed north toward Helena." The leader spat on the ground. "You're lying. We've had this place watched." "Then your men aren't very observant," Mabel retorted. "He slipped out before dawn. But he left something behind, papers," he said. "In my store?" "Maybe that's what you're really after." The men exchanged glances, clearly interested. "Show us," the leader commanded, dismounting and approaching the porch, gun still pointed at Mabel. "Put that away," she said coldly. "I'm cooperating, aren't I?" After a moment's hesitation, the man holstered his weapon, though his companions remained mounted and armed. Mabel led him into the darkened store, lighting a single lamp that cast long shadows across the shelves and counters. "He said he hid them beneath the counter," Mabel explained, moving toward it. The man followed eagerly, his greed overcoming his caution. As he leaned over to look where Mabel indicated, Wade emerged from the shadows behind him, bringing the butt of his pistol down hard on the man's head. He collapsed without a sound. "One down," Wade murmured, dragging the unconscious form behind the counter. "How many more outside?" "4," Mabel whispered back, her heart pounding. "Armed, but not particularly smart from the looks of it." Wade smiled grimly. "Let's hope not." They waited in tense silence as one of the men outside called for their leader. When there was no response, two of them dismounted and approached the store cautiously. "Jasper," one called. "You all right in there?" Mabel and Wade positioned themselves on either side of the door, waiting. When the two men entered, guns drawn, Wade and Mabel struck simultaneously, Wade tackling one man, while Mabel swung the heavy end of her rifle into the other's midsection. The resulting scuffle was brief but violent, ending with both intruders subdued and bound with rope from the store's inventory. The remaining two men, sensing something was wrong, began firing indiscriminately at the building. Wade pulled Mabel down behind a shelf as bullets splintered the wood around them. "The cellar," he urged, and they crawled toward the back of the store, bullets continuing to rain through the windows. In the relative safety of the cellar, Wade checked Mabel for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "No," she assured him, though her hands were shaking. "But we're trapped here. Those men upstairs will wake soon, and the others won't stop shooting." Wade's expression was grim but determined. "Not necessarily. This cellar doesn't connect to anything else." "There's an old drainage tunnel," Mabel said slowly, remembering. "Thomas used it once during a flash flood. It leads out to the creek bed." "Show me." The tunnel was narrow and damp, barely wide enough for Wade's broad shoulders, but it was their only option. Above them, they could hear the remaining men entering the store, discovering their companions. "We need to hurry," Wade whispered, urging Mabel ahead of him into the dark passage. They crawled for what seemed like hours, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Finally, they emerged into the cool night air, the creek gurgling softly nearby. In the distance, they could see the lights of Silver Creek, including the distinct glow of what could only be Mabel's store ablaze. "My home," Mabel whispered, anguish in her voice. Wade pulled her against him, offering what comfort he could. "I'm so sorry, Mabel. This is all my fault." She shook her head against his chest, tears soaking into his shirt. "No, those men are to blame, not you. They couldn't linger." The fire would draw attention, but it would also provide temporary confusion. They needed to use that time to get as far away as possible. "We need to reach Helena," Wade said decisively. "The U.S. Marshal there will help us. I still have the evidence." He patted his coat pocket where he kept a small journal documenting what he'd witnessed. "How?" "We have no horses, no supplies," Mabel pointed out, practical despite her distress. Wade considered their options. "There's a ranch about 5 miles east of here. The owner, Jim Parker, is a good man. He might help us." With no better alternatives, they set off on foot, keeping to the shadows and moving as quickly as Mabel's long skirts would allow. The night was cool but not cold, the stars providing just enough light to navigate by. As they walked, Wade found himself reaching for Mabel's hand, almost unconsciously. When their fingers intertwined, he felt a surge of emotion that he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of rightness, of completion. "Mabel," he said softly, slowing their pace. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked up at him, her face pale in the starlight. What is it? Wade took a deep breath. I wasn't entirely honest with you about how I knew you'd lived in Dodge City. Mabel frowned slightly. What do you mean? I didn't guess. I knew. Wade's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. Because I met you there, 18 years ago. Mabel stopped walking, staring at him in confusion. That's impossible. I would remember. Wade smiled sadly. Not necessarily. I was just a young cowboy, one of hundreds passing through with the herds. But I remember you. You were 19, maybe 20. You brought soup to the cowboys who were sick with fever during that terrible summer. Your father had arranged for the church to help care for us. Recognition dawned slowly in Mabel's eyes. The fever camp. Outside of town. My father insisted I help. Said it was our Christian duty. She studied Wade's face intently. You were there? Wade nodded. I was one of the sick ones. You sat with me, fed me soup when I could barely lift my head. Talked to me about books and far-off places. His voice softened with the memory. You were the kindest, most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Mabel's free hand rose to her mouth. I remember now. You had no beard then, and you were so thin from the fever. But your eyes, they're the same. After I recovered, I tried to call on you properly, Wade continued. But your father turned me away. Said his daughter wasn't meant for a penniless cowboy with dirt under his nails. I never knew, Mabel whispered, her eyes wide. He never told me. Wade squeezed her hand gently. I made a promise to myself then, that I'd make something of myself, become a man worthy of someone like you. I worked hard, saved every penny. Eventually bought my own land. And then, Mabel prompted when he fell silent. And then I came back to Dodge, 5 years later, only to learn you'd married and moved west. The pain of that moment still echoed in his voice. I was too late. Mabel's eyes filled with tears. All these years. I never forgot you, Wade said simply. Even when I tried to move on, build a different life. When I saw you again, standing over me with that rifle in your store, it was like time folded in on itself. For a long moment, Mabel was silent, processing this revelation. Then, to Wade's surprise, she laughed softly. All this time, I thought you seemed familiar. I just couldn't place why. Does it change things? Wade asked cautiously. Knowing this, Mabel looked up at him, moonlight silvering her features. Yes, she said softly. It explains why I trusted you from the beginning. Why being with you feels. She hesitated, searching for the right word. Familiar. Right. Wade's heart soared at her words, but before he could respond, the sound of hoofbeats in the distance reminded them of their precarious situation. We need to keep moving, he said reluctantly, tugging her forward. They reached Jim Parker's ranch just before dawn, exhausted and footsore. The rancher, a gruff but fair-minded man in his 50s, listened to their story with growing concern. Those men have been causing trouble all over the territory, he confirmed, pouring them coffee. Nobody's been able to prove anything against them, though. Until now, Wade said, producing his journal. Names, dates, descriptions, everything the marshal will need to bring them to justice. Parker nodded approvingly. I'll have my boys saddle you fresh horses. Helena's a 3-day ride from here. While Parker's wife provided Mabel with clean clothes and a chance to wash, Wade studied a map with the rancher, planning the safest route to Helena. You care for her, Parker observed, noting the way Wade's eyes kept straying to the door Mabel had disappeared through. More than I can say, Wade admitted. Have for a very long time. Parker clapped him on the shoulder. Then you'd best keep her safe, son. Women like that are rare in these parts. An hour later, mounted on strong horses and with provisions provided by the generous rancher, Wade and Mabel set off toward Helena. The terrain was challenging rocky hills and dense forests alternating with open stretches of prairie, but the horses were sure-footed and used to the landscape. They camped that night in a small grove of cottonwoods beside a trickling stream, the fire kept deliberately small to avoid detection. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and biscuits, Mabel found herself studying Wade's face in the flickering light. What happens after Helena? She asked finally. After you've given your evidence to the marshal? Wade looked up, his expression thoughtful. I hadn't thought that far ahead. My place in Wyoming will still be there. It's not much, but it's mine. He hesitated, then added softly, it could be ours. The implications of his words hung in the air between them. Mabel's heart raced as she considered what he was offering: a new beginning, a life together. "I barely know you," she said, though the words felt hollow even as she spoke them. Wade smiled gently. "I've been waiting 18 years for the chance to change that." Later, as they lay side by side beneath the stars, a respectable distance between them, but close enough to feel each other's warmth, Wade reached out hesitantly. His rough, calloused hand found Mabel's in the darkness, his fingers lacing through hers as if they belonged there. 18 years, Mabel mused, her voice soft in the quiet night. "That's a long time to hold on to a memory." "Some memories are worth holding on to," Wade replied simply. They reached Helena late on the third day, the territorial capital bustling with activity despite the approaching evening. The U.S. Marshal's office was located in a solid brick building near the center of town, imposing in its official capacity. Marshal James Harker was a no-nonsense man with a reputation for incorruptibility. He listened to Wade's account with growing interest, examining the journal carefully. "This is exactly what we've needed," he said finally, closing the leather-bound book. "Those men have terrorized honest folk for too long. With your testimony and these notes, we can finally bring them to justice." "Will you need us to stay in Helena?" Wade asked, acutely aware of Mabel's exhaustion. Harker shook his head. "Not immediately. I'll send deputies to apprehend them tonight. Once they're in custody, you'll need to return for the trial, but that could be weeks away." Relief washed over Wade. "Thank you, Marshal." As they left the office, Mabel leaned against Wade, the events of the past week finally catching up with her. "What now?" she asked tiredly. Wade wrapped an arm around her shoulders, supporting her. "Now we find a decent hotel, get you a hot bath and a proper meal, and rest." The hotel was modest but clean, and the proprietor's wife was sympathetic to Mabel's bedraggled state, arranging for hot water and fresh clothing to be sent to her room. Wade took a separate room across the hall, propriety demanding at least that much separation despite the intimacy they'd developed during their journey. After they had both bathed and changed, they met in the hotel's small dining room. Mabel looked transformed, her honey-brown hair clean and arranged simply, her borrowed dress highlighting the natural grace of her figure. Wade found himself momentarily speechless at the sight of her. "You look beautiful," he said finally, rising to hold her chair. Mabel blushed, the color enhancing her features. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." Over dinner, they discussed their options, the future suddenly wide open before them. "I lost everything in that fire," Mabel said, a hint of sadness in her voice. "The store, my home, all of Thomas's things. But not your life," Wade reminded her gently. "Not your courage or your spirit." She smiled at that. "No, not those." "My offer stands," Wade said, his voice low and earnest. "Come to Wyoming with me. We can build something new together." Mabel studied his face, seeing the hope and longing there. "It won't be easy. Starting over never is. The best things rarely come easy," Wade replied, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Mabel, I've loved you since that summer in Dodge City. I never stopped, even when I thought I'd never see you again." Tears glistened in Mabel's eyes. "How can you be so certain? After all this time?" "Because sitting across from you now feels exactly the same as it did when you fed me soup at that fever camp," Wade said simply. "Like coming home after a very long journey." 2 months later, Wade and Mabel stood on the porch of a modest but sturdy ranch house nestled in a verdant valley in southeastern Wyoming. The trial in Helena had concluded successfully, with the criminals sentenced to lengthy prison terms. With the reward money offered for their capture, Wade had been able to make significant improvements to his property, preparing it for its new mistress. "What do you think?" he asked nervously as Mabel surveyed her new home. "It's not as fine as some." But Mabel silenced him with a kiss, her arms winding around his neck. When they finally parted, she was smiling, her eyes bright with happiness. "It's perfect," she assured him. "Absolutely perfect." Wade grinned, pulling her close again. "Not yet, but it will be. Now that you're here." As the sun set behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in glorious hues of gold and crimson, Wade led his new wife into their home. On the table, a pot of soup simmered, Mabel's recipe, prepared by Wade's inexpert but willing hands. "I thought it fitting," he explained at her questioning look. "Our story began with soup. After all, Mabel laughed, the sound filling the small house with warmth. And a very long wait. Wade took her hand, raising it gently to his lips. Some things are worth waiting for, he said softly. Even 18 years. As twilight deepened into night, they sat together at their table, soup steaming in their bowls, hands intertwined between them, no longer strangers, no longer separated by time or circumstance, but finally, irrevocably, home.